What exactly was the purpose of the Mosaic covenant? Let's take a look. What I'm doing with you today is basically a 30,000 foot view. It's kind of a primer. I'm working hard to finish the book where I write about all this stuff, and in chapter 2, I cover all this, and so hopefully that'll be published one day and you can read it and get all the details. Now, to start, I want to say that I want to recognize that the line that goes from the Abrahamic covenant to the new covenant is straight. No help needed from you or me. Yahweh, God, made some promises to Abraham and said, hey, out of your seed, I'm going to bring redemption and accomplish a bunch of stuff. And so then in the person of Jesus, who is the seed, died, resurrected, and because of Jesus, the first fruit, everything that was promised in the Abrahamic covenant is going to happen. So the logical question becomes, why in the world do we need the Mosaic or the Sinaitic covenant? Well, I think it's a good question, and let's answer that now. I'm going to say that there's 6 of them with a bonus. The first one, everyone pretty much knows about it, so let's just cover it real quickly. Number 1, it was to serve as a bridge pre-first coming. So you and I have the benefit of the Gospels. We can read about Jesus, and we see clearly that he was the Passover lamb and that he was the first fruits. But before that, they didn't have Jesus. They didn't have that story to read about. And so what Yahweh did was kind of give them a sort of a kind of three-dimensional life to live into, a liturgy, if you will. And it was like a pedagogue or a custodian or a tutor. It kept them until the Messiah arrived. And so this is really the point of Galatians chapter 3. Number 2, it was to reveal sin. So whether you existed before Jesus or after Jesus, how would you know what sin was unless you had God's instruction? So a list of sins or transgressions isn't listed in the Gospels or in Paul's letters or even the prophets. That's all in the Torah, and that's where we look. 1 John chapter 3, verse 4 tells us that sin effectually is lawlessness. And so where do we get the law? We get the law from the Torah. Now, the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 7 says, hey, how would I even know that I needed a Savior unless I knew that my heart was depraved? So there's that kind of sin. His heart was uncircumcised. The only way he's going to get it circumcised is to have the Spirit put into his heart. But how would he know he would need that if he didn't have something to look at? And that's why transgressions are so important. He said, how would I know what coveting was coveting if the law told me not to covet? So the manifestation or the transgression is what you can see. You can see that you're stealing. You can see that you're lying. But that only indicates something that's happening at a deeper level, that you're utterly depraved and that you need a Savior. So it is to reveal sin. Number 3, it's to establish the kingdom's narrative. And I'm going to nuance that further by saying it's the narrative that creates the necessary conditions for Jesus' worth. Well, what gives like paper money in the United States, for example, its worth? It's because it has a little note on the bottom that says it's legal tender, all debts public and private, and that there's this larger narrative that if you go to court and you pay your debt off in cash, that the court's going to recognize that it paid in full. So the paper money is worthless unless there's a whole story that surrounds it. The Torah allows Jesus to be situated in something, because what's going to end up happening is Yahweh says, this is my son, who is characterized by all this stuff in my Torah, and with him I am well pleased. It establishes the very narrative that gives its worth. Now, here's another illustration that I use in the book, and that is I talk about a painting that I really like by Johannes Vermeer. It is in The Hague in a museum called the Mauritius, and it's the girl with the pearl earring. And most in the art world think that the girl's a tranny, which just means it's not actually a girl. It's just kind of this composite in his mind and Vermeer's mind. But, the painting itself, let's just say it was a real girl, gives that girl, or even the idea in his mind, immense value because the painting exists and it's situated in the museum and so on and so forth. It creates a whole narrative, and that's important. Yahweh found a way to exalt his son through that narrative. Now, number 4, to exalt Jesus as the first fruit. In the midst of that narrative, the central point that makes all the new covenant possible is Yeshua, salvation, Jesus as the seed. The Torah establishes Jesus as that first fruit. And so you and I will end up being the harvest, but the first harvest, the reason it was all possible is because of Jesus in that narrative. And I explain it more in the book. Number 5, to recognize the good. Now, in the regular, I'll just call it secular world for now, people think they're good because they do good works. Well, most people aren't good. They try to do good, but that's not what makes you good. Now, in the Christian world, they recognize that God's standard is utter perfection, and they recognize that there is enough not good in them that they need a savior, even though they do actually do some good stuff. And so that's the Christian line of thinking is, I fall short of the glory of God, and so I need God and I need saving. And that makes total sense. But then, sometimes Christians go a step further and say, well, because I can't do good to do the Torah or try to do good at all, I'm spitting in the face of God who gave his son Jesus. Oh my gosh, that is not right either. He said to that woman caught in adultery, go and sin no more. Sinlessness is kind of like a nonprofit organization. It's a tax status, not an organizational objective. My status in Messiah as sinless is, my status in Messiah because of what Jesus did on the cross for me. But it's not my objective to go and now disregard what doing good is. And the Apostle Paul goes over that in Romans. It's important that we do good, but we do it now because we have circumcised hearts, and we're not doing it to earn anything. We're doing it because we're responding to God's grace. Christians just kind of take that one too far, and we shouldn't. So how do we know what the good is? We look in the Torah, and we see how Jesus played it out, how Jesus did it, and we mimic Jesus. That makes us disciples. And then finally, function number 6 is to serve as a bridge pre-second coming. The same way that the Passover and the Feast of First Fruits and unleavened bread and counting the Omer up to Pentecost, hem them in was a pedagogue, a tutor for people who existed pre-Jesus. We do those things to remember and reflect upon who Jesus is. But the consummation of the kingdom hasn't happened yet. And so there's the fall feast days that you can read about in Leviticus 23, and it serves the same purpose. Yeshua, Jesus, hasn't returned for a second time. And so there is Yom Teruah, which is the Feast of Trumpets. And then there is Yom Kippurim, the Day of Atonement or Atonements. And then Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And so we are being hemmed in until his return. So we are doing those things, those feast days, in the same way that they did it pre-Jesus. We are now looking forward, and what happens is we're being hemmed in so that we do not do the practices of the surrounding nations and worship in their ways and their foreign pagan gods. Instead, we're being hemmed in, and it is a pedagogos, a tutor, a custodian for us until his return. All right, I think I got it all out there. You'll understand better when the book comes out at some point. All right, see you next week.